Hey, folks, welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Carlos, it's good to have you back, first of all.
Oh, man, thanks, Shawn. I don't even know if I was allowed to come back on because you guys had, an hour and a half of basketball talk. I mean, it was just wall to wall. Of course, you didn't include Chris Solari, our intrepid Michigan State beat writer. Of course,
Chris needs his own spot. He can't be sharing the spotlight. Graham had to share with it.
I already share a spotlight. I already share a spotlight with Graham on our Spartan Speak podcast. So
yeah, but you don't have a third.
I'm used to that.
Yeah, no, you can't.
We've had as many as 5 people in that room.
Okay,
and I think you were one of them.
Yeah, right. So, listener, that was 5. So, listener, that's of course Chris Solari's voice that you hear. Our fabulous beat writer covers Michigan State for the Detroit Free Press. Everything about Michigan State, right? Not just football and basketball. You do all of it: volleyball, ice hockey, field hockey.
I have done all of it.
I know you.
I have done pretty much everything.
I know you have. Right?
From hockey to baseball to volleyball to women's basketball.
You're a man about town. But that's not why you're here today. You're here to talk about Michigan State. You are in New York City, where the Michigan State Spartans men's basketball team is getting ready for Thursday's game, Sweet 16 game in the East Regional against Kansas State. So we're going to get your thoughts on that. When we're done talking about Michigan State, if we have some time, we're going to get into the free agency. Carlos has some thoughts on the Lions and how they're probably going to win 2-3 games next year. So we're all very excited to hear those thoughts.
If they're lucky, yeah.
Yeah, right, if they're lucky when we get to that. But thanks for joining us, Chris. It's good to have you. It's been a while since you've been in this show.
Quite a while, I think.
Yeah. No, and we got Carlos back, so let's roll. So what the heck, man? The Spartans are in the Sweet 16. There's no way you thought that they were going to be here after they lost to Ohio State at the Big Ten tournament, are you? Or did you?
I thought it possible. I mean, because probably all the way back in January, once that 7-game win streak came to an end and you started to see the dips and dives of this team, you thought something like this could be possible. But because you saw the defense at an elite level, but they couldn't score. And then you started to see them score and then they couldn't guard anybody. So you thought if they're able to put this together somehow, maybe they will, maybe they won't. So it's kind of been that roller coaster ride where you're just kind of along for it, assuming that at some point it could change. And it probably did at the right point. I really think that Ohio State game served as a wake-up call for them. And we saw probably the two best defensive performances of the season blended with some offense, 72 and I believe 60 points. So they were able to get some production on the offensive side and pair it with the defense. And that's why they're here in New York.
Well, Chris, obviously you have not been reading Shawn Windsor's columns in the Free Press because he saw this the whole time. I think it was around the Big Ten tournament when Shawn was having dinner with Tom and Tom Izzo, and she was spoon feeding them Gerber's baby food or whatever, and explained the whole thing of the what was it? Let's use a Shawn word. The zeitgeist.
Never
Michigan
use
State
that
basketball.
word. That's a Carlos word.
You've used it many times. Don't lie. I'm going to do a library search and find it.
That's a Carlos word.
It must have been your doppelganger.
No,
yeah, And Shawn saw this the whole time. Intrepid columnist, and I'm not going to say Izzo apologist, but no, he sees the bright side of everything. He knew it was coming. If they just come together, if they find themselves, and so Shawn knew. In fact, let's have a prediction right now, Shawn. How far are the Spartans going in the tournament?
I don't know that they're going to go much farther than this. I have thought for most of the year, since I saw them play Gonzaga, actually, but especially Kentucky, although, you never know with those early games because you don't know how good the other teams are. But I have thought they've had a chance to be good. I thought this back in the summer. I remember actually thinking about this when they played Duke because Duke was really, really good last year, Final Four team, and they were up by 5 with 3 minutes to go. And I knew they were going to probably lose Max Christie and a couple of guys to graduation, Gabe Brown, but I thought it was because of A.J. Hoggard, to be honest with you, Chris. The way he played in last year's tournament, and he has not really been back at that level until recently. He was showing flashes of it. So, maybe that's just my nature too, but you see the possibility in things, and I think fans and fan bases and, certain columnists want to make declarations in any given moment instead of letting things play out. I mean, I actually thought the same in Michigan and took a lot of flack for that. They ended up kind of wiping out against Rutgers in the Big Ten tournament, but they had played decent ball the few weeks before that. So you just never know, right? Right, Chris? They're young. You don't know what's coming.
Well, especially right now, because everything that you've seen around the college basketball world, this is just how it's been. I mean, teams are a little bit older. You're seeing older teams that have either had transfers, grad transfers, or extra year COVID guys kind of ascend a little bit more and probably close the gap maybe if they aren't necessarily as talented versus a team that's got experience. And I think this team has a little bit of talent and a lot of experience. And, you know, you mentioned about the Duke game last year. I think down the stretch last year when they started running Hoggard and Tyson Walker together, because they were splitting the point guard role last year for much of the season.
Because of Max
Christie. But when they started running those two together, you started to see the chemistry that I think has really carried this team throughout this season. And sometimes it's all been dependent on which version of AJ Hoggard shows up. I mean, is it the guy who's looking to set up everybody around him and attack the basket, or is the guy that's settling for jump shots thinking he's a 3-point shooter?
Well, Chris and I disagree on that, but that's the issue with Hoggard. But before we get to that, Carlos, what's your next thought here? Question.
Well, you know, Chris was mentioning the younger teams and, you know, more experience. And, you know, so that's kind of what I saw a little bit in the Marquette game that was a younger team. And they looked rattled right off the bat. They just seemed in that first half just not sure of themselves. And you could just see the poise of Michigan State, you know, a little bit of an older team, you know, more experience. You could see the poise that they were playing with and sticking to their identity, you know, sound defense. And it changed in the second half, but you could see that. I think, you know, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but going against K-State. K-State's an old team, man. They've got a lot of seniors on that team. They just took down Kentucky. They're not going to be rattled, you know, and that's the thing where this is the big game for them, the hump of can they beat a team that's feeling good about themselves, took down a blue blood, and they have a lot of experience. And maybe my favorite coach in the NCAA tournament, by the way. So that should be a fun matchup. But what do you think? I mean, how much right now does experience matter, you know, at this moment of the tournament?
I'll defer to the experienced sage here on this one.
Well, first of all, Kansas State,
that's saying old guy.
Kansas State's coach, when asked what the difference was in the game against Kentucky, he said, "We have more dudes."
Yeah, so Kansas State has a great coach, Jerome Tang, and what he said about Kentucky is going against the Blue Bloods, and you know that program experience and all that. He said all those old dudes that played for Kentucky, they ain't coming back, right? Tradition does not help you if you do not get out there on the floor and play with some dudes. And we had more dudes than they had today. So it's just a great quote. It's a fun program to watch. You know, it's gonna be hard to kind of root against them, right?
No, they're fun. As far as experience, Chris, we have not seen a young team win the title since 2015 when Duke did it with Jamel Okafor and Grayson Allen and Tyus Jones and who was the forward? Justice Winslow. I was trying to think of the other. Those four freshmen. Yeah. Now they had a couple of upperclassmen on that team that played a lot that were really important. But I think there's a reason for that. What is it? 7 years, 8 years since that's happened. You know, Carlos was talking about Marquette. Marquette's young, but they're not young like that. They're defensive player of the year, regular player of the year. I think those guys are at least sophomores.
Three juniors and two sophomores.
Yeah, so that's a fairly experienced team, but it's not seniors, right? You know, I mean, Tyson Walker's a transfer, and last year had to find his way a little bit. Chris, you and I have talked a lot about this. And he had to convince himself that he belonged at the Big Ten level. We saw he started playing better at the end of the year, and this year he's been great for the most part. And nearly willed them to win over Purdue, for example. Yeah. So yeah.
Joey Hauser's about 35 years old.
He is, and he
really has that old man game.
He's in his. It's what a great story he is. We saw him just completely break down on the court after the Marquette win. And this is a guy that thought about giving up basketball, right?
Yeah,
not that long ago. And with so in his head, he'd be out on the court. You know, when he and I talked, when I wrote that column last week, he said, "Hey, I'm out there. I wasn't playing." You know, he would be if he missed a shot, he'd be afraid to take the next shot. He was so worried. He was always looking over his shoulder, not necessarily because of Izzo, just in general. He couldn't get out of his way. So when you're talking about experience, that matters too, right? Guys that find peace, guys that find confidence.
And you can, just talking to Joey Hauser, I mean, we had a long conversation because the NCAA is using different Wilson basketballs this year for the tournament that hasn't been used in a gameplay. We started talking about the different types of balls that Michigan State uses during practice because they run out every other time. And Joey Hauser's apparently an expert on every single ball that's used at every single place by every single brand. I mean, that conversation doesn't happen a year or two ago because he was very tense, very tight, and he just seems very relaxed with himself and who he is. Sometimes I think and it's interesting too, the difference in comfortability between Joey Hauser being like that and Tyson Walker being maybe a little more tightly wound and thriving from that, because he was asked today by a number of reporters in the New York media about everything, his New York memories, favorite pizza places. He didn't want anything to do with it. He just I think he is just in play basketball mode, because that's one of the things that I've heard from him for the last couple of weeks. I just want to play basketball.
Real quickly about Hauser before Carlos goes here. When they played Marquette, he was primarily guarded by, his first name escapes me, the defensive player of the year in the Big East. Is that Prosper?
Yeah, Prosper. He got a 2 first names. So
yeah, who didn't let Hauser breathe, right? I think he took 2 threes maybe in the entire game.
Olivier Maxence Prosper.
Okay, there you go. That's why we need you, Chris. I mean, among many other reasons, but. So think about this. He's shooting at a nearly 50% clip from 3 this year. Has just been made one big shot after another in the last month. Just in a total flow. It gets into the game and can't breathe. Has no space to shoot. Gets a couple of them off early. And then with 3 minutes to go, whenever it was, finally gets a tiny bit of room in the corner and lets it go and makes it. That's what we're talking about, right? You know how hard that is to make that shot after getting hounded all. But you get your chance and you don't hesitate. So, yes, to your points about experience, to me, that's experience, and that matters.
Hey, do you guys question about the Tyson Walker stuff? As I saw that on Twitter about, he's not answering these questions and whatever. I think the whole team is from Harlem, from K-State. So I'm sure, did they get the same questions, and did they feel more comfortable answering? I mean, to me, it's a little kind of mentally soft to not be able to talk about a pizza place and the place you grew up. Like, come on, it's not nuclear codes or anything like that. What was the difference in K-State talking about New York or answering questions about New York or not answering them, and Tyson Walker?
Yeah, Noel answered questions and was fine about it. The difference, I think, is just who Tyson Walker is. I mean, he's been, I've found for the last 2 years that he's been relatively guarded. And I don't know if that's just, it's just kind of who he is. Mm-hmm. Like, if you've been around him, that it's no surprise. It's not like that was just about this question. It's just kind of how he is. He came from Northeastern, which is a smaller school. And, I know Boston's not much of a college town, I heard them say on Spinal Tap, but they also had a lot of other things. I mean, between it being a pro sports town, Celtics, you got Boston College, that Northeastern doesn't really register to the same level of coverage that, both regionally and nationally, that Michigan State gets. So I don't know how much comfortability there is with Tyson Walker yet with some of those things. He's gotten a little better at times, but I think that's just his personality. It's very, very straightforward, gruff. Basketball is his thing. Kind of personality that you see with some guys are like that. Some guys are better in front of the mic and some guys aren't. I think he's clearly much better on the court in doing some talking that he's done all year. Sometimes you have to lip read to see what exactly he's saying, but I think he does his talking on the court. He's that kind of guy.
Why do you say mentally soft for their most clutch player?
I mean, if you can't talk about pizza and stuff and your favorite hangouts in your hometown, I mean, that's not that hard of a question to answer.
No,
he also
just doesn't like
said he hasn't been there.
What's that?
He also said he hasn't been there in 5 years.
No, he
really.
did. He did say that.
He did a year at prep school. He did years in a couple of years in Boston.
He just doesn't like talking. I don't. I mean, every now and then you come across somebody like that. Like Kawhi Leonard. He doesn't talk either, right? He can't stand it. I mean, some guys are just like that.
He's also from Long Island, in Westbury. So, I mean, he's like 45 minutes out of the city, even though he was playing at Christ the King. I think I remember him saying that he was going back, traveled back and forth to Christ the King when he was going to high school there before he went to prep school in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean, I think that explains it. That's what my question was, just like, is this just him, or is it one of these, Arian Foster, I'm just here not to get fined. It's all basketball. I'm just a dude. I'm hard, and I'm not going to talk about, things off the court. I'm focused, I don't
know if it's
just who he is.
I don't even think it's that. I don't know that he's like, I'm all about basketball. I'm focused and all that. I think he is focused, and he's really good at basketball, but I don't think the two, one has the other. Some people just don't like getting in front of a mic, period. It's not because they're worried about, I'm going to put all my time over here. They just don't like it. You know that, Carlos. You've seen that in the Lions. And
sure.
And that's just one of those guys. It's too bad sometimes, especially because in that locker room over the years, there have been so many good talkers.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is funny because Izzo, right? I mean, he's one of the few guys who opens the locker room. So
he does.
You think that, answering tough question after tough question from Chris Solari every night would have prepared him for these tough pizza questions, but apparently not yet.
No, he doesn't like to talk. But in any case, so Chris, what's your, before we take a break, what's your thought here? They going to be playing Saturday?
I think they are, and I think a lot of it has to go with the way. I think Tom Izzo's talked a lot about how much matchups mean when you get to this point of the year. But I think maybe the thing that helps Michigan State the most is the matchups they had last weekend against USC and Marquette, two teams that run a lot of ball screens, do a lot of similar things to what K-State has been doing to win with their guys. So some of that, I talked to a lot of the guys today about that. A lot of what they were dealing with those two opponents last week has transferred over into the game plan this week in guarding those ball screens. There's a little difference with guys who will slip out versus guys who will try and cut. But I do think that the way they handle them, finding that rotation between Mady Sissoko and Carson Cooper on the defensive side in the post, and getting A.J. Hogarth's defense up front to be as sticky as he was, because I think that's changed them with him being more about pressuring the ball up front and making life hard. And carrying that over is going to be the big thing. That's been the one question we've had all year about this team. So, but I think that Izzo is as dialed in as I've seen him in quite a while, and I think everybody else is kind of feeding off that energy.
What do you think, Carlos?
How much? I mean, and I'm not trying to like poop on anybody or anything like that, but it felt like Michigan State got a little lucky in that game against Marquette because they just had an awful first half. It was like 2 or 3 points the first 7 minutes. They looked like a JV team. They just looked so discombobulated out there. Michigan State, can't hit a three to save their lives. A lot of guys get into foul trouble, and you saw Marquette coming back in the second half. That's the Marquette team I think most people thought that you'd see. If they had played anything even close to that in the first half, they were just such an awful team and Michigan State played good defense. I mean, give them credit for sure. Yeah, the Spartans did what they needed to do, and that's Izzo, and they were composed in that first half. But Marquette really imploded, and it's like if Marquette doesn't do that, I think Michigan State has a much harder trouble. And it's that the 3-point shooting, right? I mean, for that just to disappear. Now that's probably an anomaly. Probably not going to happen. Whatever they went 2 for 16 or whatever it was, that's probably not going to happen again. But it felt like they just got a little bit of a break there for Marquette, just not showing up for a first half.
What do you think, Chris?
Michigan State jumped out 18-5 early, and then Marquette fought it back and had it tied at halftime. I think Michigan State went in and made adjustments. I think you saw, but particularly coming out of the break, you saw Michigan State start to pull away a little bit.
Well, Marquette opened it up 8-2, remember?
Right, but they come back once Marquette takes that lead, and the defense locks them down. And then you start to see Hogard and Walker attack off the dribble. Walker hitting mid-range shots, Hogard getting to the lane. They had Marquette, I thought, had trouble with some of that. And I do think, though, that, Marquette was struggling to shoot at that point because Michigan State's defense was as good as it's been for those last 12 minutes. And you started to see guys like Malik Hall grabbing that offensive rebound, and you saw the blocks that Mady Sissoko had. And there were a couple, I think Malik Hall had a couple steals in there as well. So I think that was much more to me. And we can't talk about that without the job that Jaden Akins and Walker and Hogard did on the guards for Marquette, particularly Tyler Kolek. I mean, they shut him down.
They did. I mean, I guess I have a different view of it. It's probably similar to you, Chris. I thought that's the best they've looked defensively all year.
Yeah.
I didn't think Marquette imploded at all. Those guards, and I asked Izzo about this today. I said, when's the last time have you ever had three guards that can play both ends of the floor? And you heard him, Chris. He said no.
Yeah.
He tried to say Mateen, Charlie Bell, and Morris Peterson, but he was a forward, right? He sort of, he admitted he was a forward. These guards, these three guys get up in you, and I don't think that Marquette imploded at all. That's the best defense I've seen them play. They let up a little bit, and then they picked it back up down the stretch.
They did, and I thought they did kind of the same thing against USC. I mean, they were having trouble with the interior passing game when USC was going block-to-block passing, and they adjusted with Cooper, and all of a sudden that dried up for USC, and USC didn't have a second.
No, Boogie Ellis scored what? I mean, he was the leading scorer. I don't remember what he finished with for USC, but I don't think that was an accident. I don't know if they can keep it up against Kansas State. Noel's a different kind of player. I mean,
I'm going to throw one back at Carlos here because you mentioned about experience mattering. How much do you think Tom Izzo's experience versus a first-year coach in Jerome Tang matters in this?
Oh, that's the strength, right? I mean, and Shawn mentioned Duke with their last their last title run or whatever. They had a pretty good coach back then too, I think. So that's the huge thing is the coach and how the experience having been there. And I think that's the magic of Izzo at this point. Getting them to play together, composing them when they need to. They just, taking that time out really late, that was just a smart move. And you can see Izzo fired up. And I think that's, basketball is so much about, college basketball is so much about the coaching, And I think knowing that you have Izzo and if you're, the guy who runs that system and they're dedicated to him, to his system, the defense and all that. And, I think Shawn mentioned the thing where someone wrote about, not reaching in. If you reach in, you're going to sit here with me and all this stuff. And, they know who he is. That really matters. But Jerome Tang, though, I mean, I can't imagine that his players don't want to play for this guy. And I mean, you never know. I mean, you never know when someone's feeling good about themselves, when they have, and every year, you guys know this, every year that relationship between the coach and their team changes as guys leave, as guys come in, how do they work? And the whole thing about Hogard and Izzo always arguing with each other. And, it's a fun, unique dynamic relationship. But yeah, I think that totally matters. I think that's, if there's one advantage that Michigan State has, it's Tom Izzo and them playing Tom Izzo brand basketball and sticking to it. And I think that was the big difference with Marquette, was that these guys stuck with it. These guys weren't going to do anything weird. They weren't making extra passes or dumb plays. They were playing within themselves. And Marquette, you could see, was pressing early. Some of that was the defense, but some of that also was just, I think, just making stupid passes and dumb decisions and, weird things early on, at least. And they settled down after the half. But I would say this was because, to be honest, like how many guys on Michigan State team are like these stars that everybody's scared of? These, they don't have any, national player of the year candidate or anything. So, but they work great as a team, which is what Izzo always does, right? He always has great teams, not these amazing star, Zion Williamson type players.
Yeah, no, by and large, he doesn't recruit quite like that, although he's got a class coming in next year. But again, and I think Chris will back me up on this, the defense that those three guards can play is just different. It was not Marquette doing anything other than getting dominated. And they talked about it after the game, right? They had nowhere to go. Walker, Akins, and Hogard is the key, because he's not always engaged, right? He's not. He's not always focused. But I remember last year in the Big Ten tournament when they played Purdue, he got up into Jaden Ivey, and Ivey was struggling.
Yeah,
and I was like, wow, this is right. Do you remember that?
He had a little bit of size on him, yeah.
Because he's just so strong.
And I will say this because, I thought Jerome Tang had a great quote today that he said he talked with Izzo on the court and said he wished that him and Tom could play to see who would move on to the Elite Eight, but that's not how it is. So what it's going to come down to, who has more dudes, right?
And Kansas State might. I don't know how much Izzo helps him in this game. As Izzo pointed out today, and this is along with the thing at Michigan State, he tells his players, you get me the first game, meaning, Thursday or Friday game, and I'll get you the second on the short turnaround with the prep. That's where he really comes in. But who knows? But I do want to talk a little bit more about Izzo, what this Sweet 16 meant, because it felt like it was a while. But we need to get a break first. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied here. And let our producer do his thing, work his magic, and run some ads or whatever. And then we'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Let's talk about Izzo for a second. I know we're just talking about his prep and his turnaround, but did he need this? Did he need this Sweet 16? I mean, he hadn't been in the last two, but the year before he had a team that was a Final Four worthy team for sure, and COVID shut that down. There's something about the time bend, the time warp of COVID that made it feel like he had not been in the second round. I mean, but technically he hadn't been. He hadn't been in since 2019, so almost 4 years or whatever. But
yeah, and that was the only time he had been to the second weekend
in a couple of years
since the 2015 Final
exactly.
Four run.
So it just, you could feel the antsiness in the fan base, and I really think COVID changed it. But what do you guys think? Did he need to get, not because he was going to lose his job or anything ridiculous like that, but just, people start getting worried a little bit, or say, oh, maybe it's time for him to retire. Do you guys think he needed this second weekend this year?
No, I think that's kind of the thing that a columnist makes up so he can write a column saying, did Izzo need this? No.
Well, you don't know any Michigan State people do, or follow Michigan State Twitter, or have people. What's that?
He's Tom Izzo.
Okay,
I'm going to have a statue at the school. It does it.
Chris, can you explain the nuance to him how antsy part of this fan base was?
But are you talking about Izzo, or are you talking about the program? Because those are two different things.
I'm talking about
people
Izzo.
Want that team to win.
I'm talking about Izzo.
I think Izzo.
Come on, how?
Oh my God!
Because I think I don't
know how much longer I can keep doing this, Chris. I'm trying to be patient, trying to be kind. But at some point, there's got to be an understanding of the community we live in. Okay, go ahead, Chris. I got it off my chest.
Okay. I mean, there's a vocal contingent. How big of a contingent is that's the question. There were a vocal contingent that were questioning whether or not Tom Izzo was too stubborn for not going into the portal, too stubborn for running the same sets, too stubborn for this, that, whatever, and I it's a wrong perception because I feel like Izzo has adapted and adjusted a lot over the course of the last few. I mean, the 2019 Final Four run, you look at that team, they adapted and adjusted first to Josh Langford's injury, then the Nick Ward's injury mid-season. That's where Xavier Tillman blossomed that year to the point where they started bringing Nick Ward off the bench when he did get healthy. So Izzo's shown he's an adaptable coach. This obviously it's just a different world, and I think you're right, Shawn. I mean, the perception in the time warp of not having that 2020 team play it out, I think has changed some things. Because I mean that they had a very good team that I think projected from bracket matrix, it looked like it was going to be a 3 seed or maybe a 2 seed in that tournament. I think you also had how that 16 season ended with a very highly ranked team bowing out to Middle Tennessee. That's been on fans' minds. The Syracuse loss in Detroit, with Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson. Well, if everybody wants to think that Ben Carter was the reason and not the 3-point shots not falling that he set them up for, so be it. But those are the things that have built. So it hasn't been just like a singular thing that these fans are getting frustrated with. But now you've got, particularly with a team that even Izzo has said isn't his most talented team, and he's got them into the Sweet 16. I mean, it had been kind of in some ways, I don't want to say taken for granted that this program was getting to all those Sweet 16s, but this is 15th Sweet 16 in 25 straight NCAA tournaments. Think about that. That's 15 out of 25 that they made to the second weekend. That's an insane number. And I do, though, think that there's probably a little bit of concern of whether or not he was losing his fastball, whether or not he was going down a Mark D'Antonio path towards the end of his coaching career. And I'll tell you, the one thing Izzo has always said is if he can't take a red eye to recruit from Vegas to get back and coach his team or something along those lines, then he knows it's time. This guy's got a ball of energy still. And all you had to do was see his reaction to Malik Hall getting that offensive rebound. Sometimes I think he's concerned about whether or not his methods of coaching, whether or not his voice and the things that he says are resonating.
He said that yesterday, didn't he, Chris?
It goes back to the A.J. Hogard things, I think, sometimes.
He acknowledged that yesterday, right?
Yes.
One of the reasons he was crying when I asked him yesterday.
Yes.
He said a million reasons, but one of them was that they won in the way he thinks he can win. All right, Carlos, I'm afraid to ask, but we need to. What do you think? Did Izzo need this?
No, he didn't need it. I think it's all about the bar he has set. Like Chris says, all those appearances. That's you become subject, to the standards you set, and rightfully so. There's people. Unfortunately, Shawn, I actually do know people who are Michigan State graduates and fans, and so they expect a lot from that program, and rightfully so. He's as famous of a coach as you will find in Michigan. He's a Hall of Famer already. They're going to have a statue of him outside of Breslin at some point. It's just, he's that team. And yeah, you want them in. I think a lot of this time, what do you guys keep writing your stories and your columns about, first since 2019, Sweet 16 in 2019. That's not really fair because, COVID wiped out 2020. So it's really, if you were writing first since 2020, it wouldn't feel as bad. But since you're writing 19, like, wow, that seems like a long time ago. But a whole year was lost. And like you said, Chris, they were going to be a 2 or 3 seed. They were damn good that year. And that's always going to be the thing we didn't know is how good could that team have been. It could have been a Final Four team. But this isn't, you want to see it. And I think that's what you guys are talking about is absolutely true is does he feel he's lost it? There's always that. And that's healthy, that introspection of, am I still connecting? Am I still doing what I need to do? Am I still, now I don't know about this vocal minority that wants the transfer portal because obviously it's worked so well for Mel Tucker. That's just championship after championship for the Spartans football team. But I wouldn't question. I think you would see it. I think there was problems in that program. If it was cratering from within, if they couldn't beat anybody, if they're losing at home to bad teams and not getting into the tournament, that'd be another question.
Well,
but you don't see that right now. Mm-hmm. You just don't see that ladder, that sustained high level of these runs in the tournament that people really want. They want Final Fours every year.
Yeah, but I don't know that they expect it every year. I think
they expect it. Who doesn't know the fan base now? They expect the Final Four every year out of Izzo. Every year.
I will say they're savvier than that. That means, sorry, Chris, 1 sec. They're savvier than that. They understand. No team does that.
Fans are ridiculous, and they have no sense to them.
They're capable. Of course, they're capable. But
they're not analysts. They're fanatics.
No, of course they can be ridiculous or whatever with their emotion, but they understand that they're not going to get there every year. If he had lost to Marquette or to USC, because USC wasn't a bad team either, there would absolutely be a narrative because to your point, Chris, they hadn't been since 15. So that'd be once in 8 years, right? Now you can toss out the COVID year, and it's totally fair to say since 2019 because every time I wrote it or anybody else wrote it, they mentioned the season ended with COVID. So it was always in the context of that. But that doesn't.
They did hang a banner in 2020.
Right. But that doesn't change how it feels to people. And that's what matters, right? That's what matters. Not necessarily the reality of it, but how it feels to people. That would have been second weekend in 8 years if they had, and you can better believe he felt the pressure. That's partly why he was crying over the weekend.
Well, and
he cries because he's Tom Izzo. He cries about everything.
This Iowa game.
No, people were surprised he cried after the first round, Chris, right?
Listen, the Iowa game was a big deal. And I think from a public's perception as well as an internal perception looking back, because I mean, Tom Izzo doesn't go up to the podium after making the Sweet 16 and talk about that Iowa game and the collapse of losing a 13-point lead in the last 2 minutes and 11-point lead in the last minute with all the 3-point shooting. And, there were questions of him not fouling at the end of that game. Why didn't he foul? All these little things that built up. And that one in particular, I think, was the one that really just kind of, you had heard it, and then it started to get a little louder. And then they start playing well, and they start scoring more points, and they're having their ups and downs still, and they're not guarding anybody. And then all of a sudden, you don't hear those voices now once they start turning those things around and start winning the games. And listen, everybody talks about basketball being a game of runs. Sometimes those runs are games at a time. Sometimes those runs are a couple games at a time. The run that they need right now is, I think, partly why Izzo is important for this, because he has been there and he has seen what this team has done at the highest level on both ends of the court, and he needs them to be able to put it together. And that's on him to get them in the mindset to get there, to get done what they did in that end of season stretch offensively, pair it with the defense they played last weekend and for most of the season. And that's where I struggle to see what the ceiling for this team can be, because they are elite at times when it comes to things like that, even without much talent. That's why I don't know really what to expect. I said that going into the first weekend of the tournament too. But when you see the resolve and the resiliency and the lessons they learned from that Iowa game that Izzo has talked about so much, now he kind of brushed it aside in the moment, which is what a good coach needed to do, because he knew how fragile that team would have been. And then they come out in that Nebraska game and nearly do the same thing out of the gate and put together a magnificent second half to avoid having the mental collapse. That Iowa game was more important than I think a lot of people realize for Izzo, for the program, and for that fan base to move on from that.
Well, so Carlos, look, I want to make sure this is clear to everybody. I don't think he needed it for his job. Obviously, he didn't need the second week for his job. He's, like you say, he's going to have a statue there. It was just the perception of it. By the way, they played that's the thing about that Iowa game, is they played as well as they probably played all year up until those last 2 minutes, right? On the road, in a place nobody had won all season. Against
they'd given up 80 points at that point still, though.
What's that?
They'd still given up about 80 points.
No, because they weren't quite checking, but Iowa was also just on fire that game, obviously. But the other thing, too, is that you just said they don't have much talent. I'm not sure Joey Hauser's as good a shooter as there is in college basketball. Tyson Walker is one of the best two-way guards in college basketball. Jaden Akins, who missed the summer with foot surgery and so on and so forth, he's starting to come along. Hogard, to me, if he's going to play like he did last weekend, is the best two-way point guard in the Big Ten, right? I mean, maybe not complete offensive game. He can hit an open shot, but the way he can control the floor and the way he can get up and so are these guys, leaguers? Probably not. So that's why we say that. But relative to college basketball, they're not completely bereft of talent, even though Izzo likes to say that. He says that all the time, though.
You don't need leaguers. You need leaders at this point in the year.
Well, also saying he's the best two-way point guard of the Big Ten isn't saying a lot, because it's probably the most overrated conference in college basketball, right? I mean, so here's a question, right? Has he done enough getting just to the Sweet 16? Even if they lose to K-State, is the heat off, or whatever you want to say? Has he done enough to kind of like settle the fan base? The
conversation, does it settle down? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Right. I mean, has he done enough? He's gotten to only Big Ten team to get to the second weekend. That's a great
question.
Right?
I'm curious that's a great question, Carlos, because on the one hand, yes, and the team talked about this before the postseason, before Chicago, actually. They had a goal. Their goal this year, now they have lots of goals, but I remember Joey Hauser in particular talking about they wanted to get Izzo to a second weekend. They felt it. They wanted to be there. None of them had been there. They wanted it for themselves and I thought about that. I thought, okay, now that they're there, are they going to relax in the wrong way? I don't know. On the other hand, to your point, Carlos, now that they're here for the fan base, well, okay, we're here. Let's get to the Final Four, right? So you get greedy. So which is it? What do you guys think? Is it enough? Because I kind of think it is.
It's still a 7 seed playing with house money. I do think that there is, I think, a lot of that from the fans that have kind of backed off. Like I said, I mean, you don't hear the same chirping.
No,
and
you
believe
don't.
me, I heard it in my email for weeks.
Me too.
And it does come down to Hogard. I mean, you don't want to pin it all on one person.
No, but it does. It does.
But you also saw what happens. 5 guys can't hit a 3-pointer, but you get that point guard going to the basket,
downhill.
And then all of a sudden, different things happen when he's taking the coaching from the coach and translating it to the players on the floor.
Chris, tell Carlos what Hogard, Joey Hauser said about Hogard. I don't know if you were there or not, in the locker room after the Marquette game. And I was asking him about Hogard. He said he can take us as far as he wants to take us. It's up to him.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that one, but that's not a surprise. I mean, everybody that we've talked to, I mean, the guys that Hogard and Walker in particular, because listen, 3-point shots are going to fall. They're not going to fall. Sometimes that happens. I mean, they've struggled 3 games in a row now from the arc. The Ohio State game, then the 2 games in Columbus. What's been the change between Ohio State and the last 2 weekends are the defense and the offensive attack into the paint, but from the point, whether it be Hogard, there were back-to-back possessions in that game against Marquette that helped seal it, with first Walker going and leaning into contact and finishing with the left hand. Then Hogard comes at you, drives down the right side and finishes through contact. I mean, how many teams in America have 2 guys that can do that to you from the point and have the ball skills to be able to kick it out for an open 3 if it's there on top of it? That's what makes this team
What do you
dangerous.
think? So what's your thought, Carlos, to your good question? What's your answer?
I think he's done enough. I think getting him the second weekend and in the context of being the only Big Ten team that did it. And also part of it is, I mean, not a huge number of the fan base is going to travel to New York, but being in New York, I think hey, we're in New York, this is pretty amazing. I think people are going to be happy with that. Madison Square Garden, it doesn't get better than that. So that context matters a little bit. Now it's also, if you beat K-State, but you lose to FAU somehow, then that's maybe a little bit different of a letdown. But Sweet 16, I mean, I think that's probably enough to just say, hey, and especially if this game is close, even if they don't win, like we've said, there's no amazing star on this team, the talent, whatever you want to talk about, but they play really well together. They do have enough talent to do. This is the thing. I think, Chris, you've kind of mentioned this. You don't know how far this team can lose by 15 to K-State, or they can get to the final. They can play in the championship game. I mean, it's like you just don't know where this team is going to be. They have that kind of weird potential
with the right matchup too.
I have a really important question for both of you. And this comes from Graham Couch, who started a little Chernobyl on Twitter the other day with this kind of, how Graham likes to throw out these, declarative opinions on Twitter. And he said, so here's the question is, Michigan State's the 7th seed, right? K-State's the 3rd seed. What's the upset? If Michigan beats K-State, is that an upset? Because Michigan State is actually favored by the bettors in Vegas. They're like a 1.5 point favorite. And Graham's contention is, if you're the betting favorite, you're the favorite. It doesn't matter what the seed is.
I mean, he's not wrong on that, especially in this world we live in where betting is now the big topic. It's no longer a taboo topic.
That'll be the expectation to some degree, although I think the fans ultimately will remember, Michigan State fans, that they were still the lower seed. So, by the way, it's funny because I was joking, Carlos, with a couple of people. I've written obviously a lot about Michigan State and Izzo lately, and I wrote a column the other day just about what he's done with this team, and you get done and you're like, and it was just sort of I hate to use this word, but it's a glowing column in a lot of ways, and it's weird because you're talking about a statue and all that, and it's been an up and down year, but when you look at what he just did and you start thinking about the numbers and and Chris knows this, what they accomplished when they beat Marquette, what Izzo did, he set the record for the most wins in the history of the NCAA tournament as a lower seed. That is radical.
It is.
Right? It is
when you think of where this program has gone.
That's just radical.
But that comes in, and I say the same thing about college football, right? we get to the end of October and the beginning of November, and college football fans have an amnesia, right? They think whoever's on the top of the poll or whoever's at the top of the standings at that point are going to win it all, forgetting completely how chaotic November always is in college football. The same thing I think happens with Michigan State basketball fans. The roller coaster ride through a Big Ten season is tough because these teams know each other. And listen, when you're the dean of Big Ten coaches, they have 28 years of film on you, right? And many of those coaches have been there for a number of years, so teams know how to play against you. And yet they were still winning Big Ten titles. They won that 2020 Big Ten title, a share of it. So, what are we talking? We were talking about a 2-year Big Ten title dip, right? 21, 22, and 23. So 3 years now, they haven't won a Big Ten title. But now look at this team, right? I mean, this is, I think, the amnesia of the Michigan State fan base kind of coming back around and say, oh yeah, Tom Izzo can do this at this time of the year. And it's fascinating. I mean, it really is, because I think I've seen this. I think back to the year that they went as a 7 seed. People were frustrated with that team and they were kind of limping in, and they get a 7 seed. What happens? They end up winning in Syracuse and going off to the Final Four in Indy that year.
And then kind of losing to hung around with Duke for half in the semis and just lost to a better talent. We were talking about that team earlier.
There's not a team like that Duke
with
team,
4 pros like that. Alabama's close. I mean, they have the best player in the game.
And they've already played Alabama. They played Alabama out in tournament
without Hall and Akins.
Without Hall and Akins. And they also have played, if they are able to get through Kansas State, they've played Tennessee in a close scrimmage and were right there with them before the year without Akins. So, but Carlos, there's some familiarity of teams that are out.
What do you think about that? I mean, it's like the old, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but I can't remember the quote. I'm going to paraphrase here. I think it was Bear Bryant, maybe it was somebody else, but that old coach is saying, I can beat you with mine, and then I can beat you with yours. And that's what I think of that when I think about his record-setting number of wins as a lower seed. He rarely loses when he's the favorite. Now, obviously, Middle Tennessee State is the one that everybody remembers the last decade, but maybe Syracuse, too, would probably be right behind that. Yeah. But although that team got the Final Four. But what do you think of that, Carlos, just in terms of what it says about your legacy and your tenure?
I mean, it says a lot, and I think there's sports in college, especially, where teams know how to win in the postseason. That's all coaching. I mean, as you know, Shawn, I went to Cal State Fullerton, and that's a baseball school, and there are many times where that school has not been, necessarily the most talented or the whatever, but they know how to win in the postseason. They've been there so many times that it's never a shock for that team to make a run and to get to the College World Series, whatever it is. And the same thing in basketball. I mean, I think football is a little bit different, but that high intensity playoff atmosphere, all the extra timeouts, the TV stuff, you when you've been there, you know how to do it. You prepare yourself. You have that legacy in your program. You get it. So it's nothing new. You're built for the postseason. I think Tom Izzo is been built for the postseason. So, like, to Chris's point, these not a ton of Big Ten titles necessarily all the time, but he knows how to win when it counts.
He does. We need to get Chris out of here real quickly. The thing I'd say about the flip side, and so this is where Izzo gets some criticism, is that he hadn't had the recruiting classes because he gets to the Final Four and runs into more talent generally, right? And so but that's a different question, a different discussion. But we need to get Chris.
You know what? I will say this though, because they do have that class coming in next year. This year was, at least from some people in the fan base, was always thought of a stopgap year. Continue the streak, move on. Whatever happens.
What if they're not as good?
I think now that they're actually, that's all.
I've been thinking about that.
That's possible. That's possible when you have a younger team, right? But I will say this: you've got a more experienced team right now. You're in the Sweet 16. I'll kind of echo what AJ Hogarth and some of those guys said. Why not us, right? I mean, they've got the pieces. Can they put them together? If they do like last weekend, I think they can. somehow make it to Houston, and we'll all be stunned.
College basketball is weird like this. They lose Jaren Jackson and Miles Bridges to the pros, and they're better next year, and they go to the Final Four because they put the ball in Winston's hands, right? And Tillman turns into just the best big man defender in the country. You just don't know. But in any case, thanks for joining us, man.
I'm glad I could.
Yeah,
it's been a while. It's been a minute.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. We know you got to get back to your beat and get back to your analysis. Any last parting thoughts for our friend here, Carlos?
No, just hope it all works out for Chris and he gets to go to Houston and get a ride in first class with Jill Rexroyd and you, Shawn.
Well, he'll be sitting in traffic in Houston. A lot of good food down there, though. So, all right, look, let's take one more quick break and come back and wrap this show up. Thanks again, Chris. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Carlos, it's our duty to say a couple of words here about the Lions and free agency before we wrap this show up. You and I wrote columns. I don't remember what I wrote about. You wrote that they're going to be terrible next year. But anyway, what do you think of their free agency maneuvers, moves, signings so far?
I think that they've been, they've been cautious. This is Brad Holmes. He's not gonna. This is his MO. He doesn't want to go out and spend a boatload of money on the top free agents on the market. He believes in building to the draft. That's a solid philosophy. And my contention is only that, this year is their year. This is the year in which they will never be or foreseeably be set up to win the division and make a run like they are this year. The division's weak. Aaron Rodgers is leaving it. They're on the upswing. I think this is when you got to sort of take a little bit more of an aggressive approach in free agency. They made some good moves. I mean, I don't dislike any of the moves that they've made, but I wish they just would have been a little bit more aggressive. I wish they'd signed, and this is not a free agency move, a free agent per se, but Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback from the Rams, I wish that they'd signed him or traded for him. He ends up going to Miami. The total cost was a third rounder and a nobody tight end because the Rams needed to clear cap space. And of all the connections that the Lions have to the Rams, you would think that they would have been able to swing the trade for Jalen Ramsey, probably future Hall of Famer. So, but they still set themselves up. They still set themselves up to be better, especially defensively. So they made some moves, and I think they're going to lean on the draft and seeing some more development from their younger players, take a step. But that defense needs a lot of help. And I wish they'd just done a little bit more and been a little bit more aggressive. But hey, Brad Holmes has done well in the draft, so maybe he can, strike gold for a third straight year and get what he needs.
That'd be something.
What did you think?
I mean, that'd be something.
It would be.
I mean, how many GMs go three? I remember last year doing a piece where I looked at the drafts over the last 20 years of different teams, and there are very, very few instances where a team goes 3 straight years with finding, starters and good starters, above level starters, that kind of thing. Seattle did to set up their Super Bowl run. They had, I think, 3 straight really good drafts, getting a couple all pros and that sort of thing. So it's really tricky to do, but we'll see. I mean, I guess he deserves the benefit of the doubt until he starts having drafts where he doesn't produce like he just has. But yeah, I like the moves. I mean, the Ramsey thing, I feel like there's a reason that he got a third round. That he was worth the third round. There's something out there. There's something the league is leery of. Maybe it's he's just going to come and want more money or whatever at the end of his contract. I don't know, but you feel like whenever that happens, something happened. Or maybe it's just the tape of him last year, and people think they've fallen off in the production a little bit. So who knows? So I don't know. I know that Cam Sutton, who they got as a quarterback from Pittsburgh, it probably isn't ever going to be what Ramsey was at his peak, and maybe Ramsey has a second peak. I don't know, but he's certainly an upgrade, right? So
it's not hard to have an upgrade, but yeah,
no, for sure, it's all relative. No, I think they made some smart moves. I think their defense is probably a little bit better, and they're counting on the young guys, and then maybe getting a little help in the draft. And I think they really want this to be sustainable. They didn't want to give up even a third round pick. They don't want to give up too much of their cap space. Maybe they feel like they need some maneuverability, some flexibility is the better word, down the road in case they need a quarterback of some kind. Take a swing at a quarterback, take a swing, whether the draft or, who knows? What's happening with Aaron Rodgers? He's not, obviously, but in prime, high-level quarterbacks don't become available very often. So who knows? But you're right. They want to build through the draft. They've gotten better the last couple of years. And, it is kind of an interesting spot because the quarterback was really good and you don't know if it's sustainable, but they're banking on that, at least for this year. I completely agree with you about winning the North. And I don't know that they needed a big splashy free agent to do that. They weren't that, they were pretty close this past year. Maybe you could argue, a little bit more help defensively, and they win a couple of those games when they started 1-6. Miami comes to mind, oddly enough, right? That game. So
yeah. Well, I think that the Ramsey thing, he gets there and they sign him to a 3-year, like $55 million contract or whatever. So you wanted a contract extension, the cap space for the Ram, and hey, I'm sure that Brad Holmes knows Jalen Ramsey pretty well. Maybe they know the tape. Maybe they see something that we don't see. But I still think that, he didn't. Right now, I would be willing to wager that Ramsey's better than Cam Sutton. He
very well might be, for sure.
And I could be wrong about that. It could be they sign these guys, and they're going to be perfectly fine. But I think that, free agency, we've seen it enough with the Lions play out over the years. When they got guys, they've missed on free agents, obviously. But when you've gotten guys like Golden Tate, and Glover Quinn, guys like that in the past, Kyle Vanden Bosch, when you've gotten these more, close to the top of the market guys who've made a big, difference, a big contribution. One thing, you're talking about games you look at, look at that Carolina game. That Carolina game at the end of the season when they lose, they shouldn't have lost to that team. That was a game where, you can't pinpoint on one little thing, but who they missed in that game? TJ Hawkinson. They missed a Pro Bowl tight end. They were struggling. Their tight ends did not play well that game. They're not great tight ends at this point. Brock Wright. And TJ Hawkinson that same day, he gets 2 touchdowns and 100 yards for the Vikings. They could have used that kind of production. They win that game and they're in the playoffs. So I'm not sure quite.
Or if the linebackers are better spots, right? You could say that too.
You can go back and forth all day long. I'm just saying they had this piece, this elite player. And I think you still need elite players to make the difference, in close games. And I think that's where it's always great to think that you're going to build this sustainable team, a bunch of, you're going to find gold in the 3rd round and draft guys who are going to be great, and Amon-Ra St. Browns and whatever. If you can keep that going, more power to you. It's hard to keep that going, to find those nuggets, and to be really selective in free agency, to be so just judicious and careful about how you construct this team and win at a high rate. And I think right now, like we've talked about this a lot, Ben Johnson, he's here for this year. If they make the playoffs, there's just no way he's going to be around. He's going to be that offense should be even better. And by the way, I liked the whole David Montgomery over Jamal Williams deal. And that was one where they committed, whatever they signed to a 3-year deal or something, to me, they're approximately the same player. Montgomery's got more versatility. But I like that signing. I like that. That was one of their declarative, the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson one also was more of a declarative signing, but the Johnson one I like, or the Montgomery one I like, because I think he's probably an upgrade over Jamal Williams.
Yeah, so, we'll see. Yeah, right. Potentially more versatile. Right?
More versatile. I like his. I've seen him play enough with the Bears.
He's a tough runner too. He is.
Yeah, two very good tough runners. Helps make up for any deficiencies that we might see from Jamal or DeAndre Swift, and whether he's available or not in his injury history. But they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything bad. But I don't think that you could look at them and just say, wow, they made a big leap in free agency. They're really going for it. And I think one of the things, what did Brian Hilton say? One of the things at the end of his end of season press conference was, someone asked, yeah, it was Burkett actually asked him about the quarterback, and you take a look at drafting a quarterback. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, it's really easy to get a lot worse at quarterback than it is to get better. And that kind of speaks to his cautious nature a little bit of, I don't want to make the wrong move, but it's going to be hard to make the right move when you're scared of making the wrong move all the time. So this may very well play out. Maybe Brad Holmes has the secret, the cheat code on NFL personnel wisdom.
Who knows?
But
who knows, right?
They're going to have a really good draft for defense, especially in linebacker.
Do you really think he's scared? Though? I don't think he's scared. I mean, he took a swing last year in the draft and moved up to get a second first-round pick to take a guy who tore his ACL in the national championship, the national semis. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so we don't know.
Which to me, that was a bit risky.
That was risky. Yes, he took a swing.
So absolutely,
I don't
that's
know.
true. That was really risky. I mean, according to some folks, I guess it depends on what you believe. All right, we're gonna definitely get into more football talk over the next few weeks. We've got the draft is out there a bit. We can get some people in here, some more experts to talk about the lines and some of these moves and philosophies and who they might take in the draft. And we'll get Dave Burkett back in here because he'll probably have 10, 11 mock drafts at that point. So that'll be great. But we need to get y'all out of here. We need to get out of here. We got some stuff to go cover. So I think it's time to what do we call that segment? Oh, Carlos, my favorite
Sean's
thing,
favorite thing.
Sean, no, it's Carlos's favorite thing.
Sean's favorite thing that he steals from Carlos every week. All right. Well, Sean, my favorite thing this week is probably close to your heart, actually, is getting to travel a little bit and going down to Florida. This is actually a couple weeks ago, but since I missed last week, I've been saving it up. But as you know, it was spring training's fun to kind of be at. It's a different animal than almost anything else we cover in sports. People are kind of looser and, they're still working the kinks out. Everybody has a little bit of time to kill because nobody's at home. You're there for a long time. I was there for about a week. And so it was just a lot of fun to be in the warmth and see some old guys like Jim Leland hanging around and chatting with our buddy Dan Dickerson on the field. And it's just a kind of a unique experience to have that time. And since it feels like forever since we've had baseball season. So to be in the warmth, to go to Michigan in the cold and the snow, to suddenly you're in Florida, it's 80 degrees and everybody's wearing shorts and hanging out and chit-chatting. It's a fun time. And I always tell this, if you're a Tigers fan or baseball fan, go down to spring training, make a little pilgrimage for a week or so. You can hit a bunch of ballparks. It's a cool atmosphere. So highly recommend it. So my favorite thing that week.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. You're right. Spring training is it's fun. Just the pace, right? It's just the pace.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks that come to the games are either on vacation or retired, and that adds to it for sure. It's a party, but not like a serious. It's not like opening day where people are getting, hammered, right? But yeah, it's just chill and warm.
Well, if you go out to the outfield berm, the left field, at Joker Marchand.
Yeah, but it's chill and there's hope and all that sort of thing. I would say for me, this past week was sitting courtside, and where were we? Oh, Columbus. I'm starting to get confused. Columbus, Ohio, at the Nationwide Arena, hockey arena for your heart, Carlos. Watching Marquette and Michigan State from a few feet away. Even though I was at a tournament game, a few of them last year. Michigan actually got to the Sweet 16 last year. Sometimes I just forget. And that game, even though it was a second round game for the right to get to the Sweet 16, felt like a regional final game to me. And from the very tip, there was just an intensity, and there was tension from right away. Marquette's a really, really good team, and the fact that Michigan State kind of met that, and I, going into the game, I always root for a competitive game. Whatever the sport is, I think it's fun when it's a competitive game. And plus, it's selfishly, it makes for interesting stuff to write about. But just feeling that up close, watching the plays get made down the stretch, that was fun. But just that intensity, sometimes it's easy to take for granted what we do, and then you get and sit and you witness something like that. And it's funny because Izzo talked about after the game that that was as intense a game as he'd been in a long, long time. Also contributing to him kind of breaking down the way he did, including, Joey Hauser broke down. But they just really felt that. But just when, Carlos, you're talking about spring training, well, I would say that, as somebody that loves basketball, but just in general, a sporting competition, when it reaches that level, where there's that kind of focus and engagement, it's really breathtaking to watch when you're up close. So that was by far my favorite thing.
That's a fun. We've talked about that before. The tournament. There's just nothing like it in sports, and that's another one, right? If you haven't been there as a fan, you need to go to a NCAA
It's true, and they're not all
regional site.
It's true, and not all. I've been to plenty of tournament games over the years, and most of them aren't quite like that one. That one was just. The deeper you get, they are. Final Fours are weird because they're in football stadiums and there's tension, but actually you feel the tension of a Final Four more watching on TV, in my opinion. But there's something about a regional final or even a regional semi. So we should feel that way here at Madison Square Garden when Michigan State plays Kansas State. But there's just something about it's that regional final feel. And that, I don't know why, but Shaka Smart, Marquette's coach, talked about the same thing. For whatever reason, that game had it. And they don't always that early in the tournament, but that one did. So I was grateful. No, did I lose you?
That's look. I look forward to more experiences like that for you.
You're blown away by my words. Yeah, I'm sure you are. All right.
I was moved to cheers like Hauser and Izzo. Sorry.
What's that?
I was moved to cheers like Hauser and Izzo. So I was moved to tears.
You don't often see a college basketball player break down like that after a second round game, but it just sort of speaks to his journey. But anyway, we talked about that. We want to go back down that road. We're trying to get out of here, and you got stuff to do. I need to go finish writing, but I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're feeling better. And who do we need to thank besides the listeners, of course?
I think our producer Robin Chan, who's put up with us long enough, and who else? Our executive producers, Kirkland Crawford. Actually, he's our only executive producer now, right? And Anjanette Delgado, interim editor of the Free Press. I guess she's an executive producer as well. So, but mostly, Shawn, we got to thank the fans. But they got to know how to find this show. Where do they find it?
Wherever you find your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. When you get there, subscribe, give us a rating, give us a shout, give us a comment if you like. We welcome all of it. Until next time, we'll be right back. Not right back, but until next time when we are back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn.